What I'm not going to do is whine about it, and I'm not going to worry about something that to some extent is out of my control. I think it was Viktor Frankl who said there is one freedom that can't be taken away from a person, and that is the freedom to choose your attitude when faced with a set of circumstances.
A quick reminder before we start the show that nothing you hear on the Reclaim Your Rise podcast should be a substitute for personalized professional medical advice. Please always consult your physician or other medical professional before making any changes to your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Welcome to the Reclaim Your Rise podcast. My name is Lauren Bongiorno, nationally board certified health coach and founder and CEO of Risely Health, where we help people and families impacted by type 1 diabetes take ownership over their lives so that they can transform with more freedom and confidence. Everyone has a different reason to be here. You might be seeking knowledge, support, or community, but at your core, I know that you long for something deeper. You're here for transformation. And that's what the Reclaim Your Rise podcast is all about. All right, quick intermission for a PSA and story that I have to share with you guys about a mysterious high blood sugar case that one of our coaching clients experienced recently. So for 2 weeks, he couldn't figure out why he was running higher than usual. We're talking mid 200s with his blood sugar, even 300s, stubborn, not coming down. And he went through his usual list of reasons, right? Food, insulin sensitivity, stress, sleep, hydration, but none of those factors seem to be the culprit. And so finally, he came to our coaching session and I said, hey, do you think that your insulin has gone bad? And it turns out that's exactly what it was. And so if you're anything like me and this particular client, you might not always be thinking about keeping your insulin at a safe temperature. In the refrigerator, insulin should be stored at 36 degrees Fahrenheit to 46 degrees Fahrenheit. And outside the fridge, it can withstand temperatures between 36 degrees and 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That means that if you live in or travel to warmer climates or very cold climates, then your insulin is at risk for spoiling. And we all know that this stuff is our liquid gold, which is why I recently bought the Voyager cooler from the brand For All Family. If you don't know them, For All Family creates products that help people protect their insulin, and they have more than 200,000 customers worldwide in the US, Canada, Australia, India, and soon Europe. And the majority of their staff also lives with T1D, which are companies that I always love to support. So if you don't have one of these coolers yet, I highly, highly recommend it to protect your insulin. You can use the link in the show notes to check out all of their products. It's available on Amazon and directly from the For All Family website. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. So almost exactly a year ago on November 1st, 2022, my dad, Peter Bongiorno, came on the podcast for the first time to talk about what it was like being a caregiver to a child with type 1 diabetes. It was for my 22nd diabetes anniversary, and it was an emotional episode. We had such wonderful feedback for people saying, we want your dad to come back on and we want him to, talk about this or talk about that, especially from the parents who were tuning in and listening. And so I've always had this thought about one day him coming back on to do like a part 2, but never in a million years could I have predicted that the second time that he came back on the show would be a year later to share his journey with receiving a type 1 diabetes diagnosis himself at the age of 64. So that is where we are. We are here today with my dad, sharing his journey to receiving specifically a type 1 LADA diagnosis, otherwise known as type 1.5. This is called LADA because it's latent autoimmune diabetes in adulthood. It very much presents like type 2 diabetes in the beginning and has similarities to type 1, but is just a way slower progression of your insulin production declining. So my hope and my dad's hope with this episode is to help people who are in that stage of feeling like they, have gotten this type 2 diagnosis or pre-diabetic diagnosis and it's just intuitively not making sense. They're exercising, they're, eating right, they're, doing quote unquote everything they're supposed to be doing, but their A1C is continuing to rise. We hope that this episode can be a reminder that we all need to advocate for ourselves and for our health and to trust our intuition on things. And as a message to all of us in the community that Diabetes, type 1 diabetes, is something that is super common in adulthood and is not just something that children get diagnosed with. 40% of type 1s in adulthood are misdiagnosed as pre-diabetic and type 2 diabetic. And I think throughout this episode, with all the twists and turns of what you'll hear, you'll understand why it is a little bit challenging to diagnose. I think we should just dive into the episode and let my dad share his story. I'm really excited and looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. If you're watching on YouTube, drop it in the comments below. If not, send us an email to hello@riselyhealth.com. I can forward it to my dad, or shoot me a DM on Instagram at Lauren_Bongiorno. Without further ado, for the second time, help me welcome my dad, Peter Bongiorno, to the show, and let's rise. This is so fun. Dad, welcome back to the podcast. This isn't your first time on, but this is your first time sharing some different news, and it's going to be a different conversation than when you came on a year ago.
I like the microphone. I feel like I should sing Summer Wind or something from Sinatra.
Okay.
But I don't sing well, so I probably won't do that.
I actually had the camera rolling when you were singing a little bit, just like testing out the mic, so we could clip that in if you want.
You're not going to disclose that.
No, not today?
I mean, it's your show.
Okay. Well, so funny. Mom was sitting here last week recording for my 23rd diabetes anniversary episode. And so you're the second person sitting in this like in studio experience, because everybody's usually virtual. And I'm really glad that we're doing this in person though, because obviously this is a very sensitive episode. It's something that today actually, so we're recording this on Tuesday, October 31st. It's coming out next week, so next Tuesday. And today on social media, I shared for the first time about your type 1 diabetes diagnosis. And I'm going to print out all of the comments for you to read, because there's so much love, so much support, but also so many people who have shared their stories about getting misdiagnosed as type 2 and then finally getting a correct type 1 diagnosis, which you can relate to a lot. But then also 2, having like the type 1 in the family for so many years, and then all of a sudden the 70-year-old, mother or father gets diagnosed, or the sibling gets diagnosed, and they're no longer the only type 1 in the family. I want to share those with you eventually, but just wanted to kind of bring you back to last year when we first recorded the episode on what it was like to be a parent of a type 1 child, and just see overall, how are you feeling today, knowing that like people know what your beta cell production number is at.
Well, considering the fact that I'm not really on social media, I don't have Instagram, I don't TikTok, and I don't share much of my life with anyone outside of my inner circle. Everyone knowing my B cells, is that the way I have to do that? Yeah. Is a little strange, but if it helps you get the word out, if it helps other people understand the dilemma in our medical system, and if it helps people get properly diagnosed, then certainly it's worth going out of my box a little bit for you and others.
I know everyone listening, so he came over, we shared a couple hours ago this morning on social media that he, had diabetes and type 1, and with that came a lot of text from his, just people and colleagues being like, oh my gosh, you have type 1 and this whole thing. And my dad walked in today, he's like, I have to go into the office in a couple hours, and mom's there, because she's their office manager, and mom's there, and she says everybody there knows because they saw Lauren's post on Instagram. So I would say this is the most, like you're going from being private about your life to like the total opposite extreme end of that.
No doubt.
Okay, so let's dive into like how did we get here? There's a lot here, and there's no way that like we could have shared all of this in any other forum than a podcast, because there's just stories and twists and turns that really, I think, help people maybe understand why I personally and why we haven't really shared your story since initially finding out about this type 1 diagnosis back in January of this year. So it was January 31st. I was looking back through my phone. So almost 9 months. And in order to understand how we got there, or like in order to understand that timeline of then till now, we have to first back up to like the years prior into you getting diagnosed as pre-diabetic and type 2 diabetic. So, do you want to just give us some 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 of your medical history, or just like some of, like I don't even like, yeah, just like where what parts you think are important to share?
Well, it's a little bizarre, no doubt, but I'll do this for you.
Thank you.
So I was told that I have type 2 diabetes. I guess last January it was official, and they determine it's official based on your A1C, which essentially is a look back, take a blood test, go back 3 months, and see essentially what was the average where amount of glucose you had, moving around your blood, and the higher amount of glucose in the blood is some indication that either you're not producing enough insulin to bring down the glucose and transport it into the cell wall, or the cell walls are not accepting the glucose, commonly known as insulin resistance, or combination thereof, or other reasons why your glucose is high. So they look at your A1C and they go, hey, your A1C is supposed to be what, around.
So when they mark you as pre-diabetic, that is above a 5.4. And then they mark you as type 2 if it's a 6.4, around
Right,
a 6.4.
yeah. So about, I don't know, around 10 years ago, my A1C, it was starting to go from my 5.2 to 5.4. No, I'm sorry, 5.1 to 5.3, and the cautionary word from the doctor saying, you got to watch, you don't want to be pre-diabetic. From there, a couple of years later, I was 5.4, and then 5.6, and 5.8, and it continued up until.
So I'm looking.
You have the more specific numbers.
Yeah, we wrote them down because it's, we wanted to get this right. So I have August 2019 is when you got that 6.0 A1C. That was very confusing to you for numerous reasons. And I think the most important reason being that you are one of the healthiest people I know, in terms of you've been in the gym since you're 18 years old. You work out, you eat super, super healthy. Of course you eat just normal American food as well, but you're very health conscious. So when you were in that pre-diabetic stage, approaching kind of that 6.0, in 2019 number, can you just explain a little bit more about what your mindset was when you were diagnosed as pre-diabetic?
Yeah. So up until, let's say, when I was first told that my A1C was going up approximately 10 years ago, I had already been nutrition conscious, and if I went off on a Friday night or whenever with whatever item of food or alcohol, I was at least aware, having had the knowledge, that I was definitely departing from what things should have been. But for the most part, I've been nutrition aware for many, many years. I had been, as you said, since high school in a gym one way or the other, whether it's yoga, meditating, Wing Chun Kung Fu, or other martial arts, or weightlifting, or cardio. We're doing certain things, and throughout the years. And so when the doctor said to me, your A1C is going up, and you could be potential pre-diabetic, I kicked in high gear, stepped it up in terms of nutrition, cardio, and I said, okay, I can handle this. At the same time, approximately the same time, I was diagnosed, while we're sharing with all of your followers my medical condition, an aortic aneurysm, a cardiothoracic aortic aneurysm, which essentially is the inner layer of your 3 layers of your aorta, your artery, your endothelial tissue, which gets worn away. And as a result of getting worn away, it's like a bubble in a tire. And if that bursts, you got about 20 minutes, if you're lucky enough to get to a cardiothoracic surgeon's office, not actually office, actually in surgery or close to it, because it's a problematic condition as the blood is squirting all over the place. So I had already, not to be harsh about it, so I had already been aware that I had to take care of myself, nutrition-wise, exercise-wise. Had to be careful not to cause a dissection of the aneurysm. So when I was told about the potential to be pre-diabetic, I became very aware. I'd already became a pescatarian for the purpose of the aneurysm, and I stepped that up at some point in time to not only having only fish and no meat, but I had read Dr. Esselstyn's book about very little fats, essentially the opposite, seems to me the opposite of Dr. Haber's good fats are great. Dr. Esselstyn was, if you don't have, if you keep your fat low and have complex carbs and you're doing vegetarian, essentially, it would be better for you and can help potential insulin resistance. So I was very on top of the exercise, I was very on top of the diet, on top of the nutrition. And as I'm doing all of that and eating complex carbs and counting carbs and keeping fats between 9 and 11 grams a day, including specifically mostly only good fats, while I'm doing all of that, my A1C is going up and up and up and up. And this is a problem. So as it starts to near 6'1", I tell my doctor, okay, listen, I got this. I'm not going to get diabetes. And I then kick in and I go vegan for one straight year, which wasn't easy for me.
Okay, we need to take a pause because you just said a lot there. Also, we need to make sure everybody heard about the aneurysm part because it is actually a really significant part of not only your journey, but our relationship, you and I. So when my dad got diagnosed with this aneurysm, which there are so many people that walk around with an aneurysm on a daily basis that don't even know that they have it, and then all of a sudden it can burst at any moment, basically, if it's enlarged and it's too big.
Jack Ritter, I think George C. Scott, I think many others.
Okay, so some famous people have had an aneurysm, and it's like you can be lifting at the gym weight and bench pressing or doing push-ups, something with your chest, and all of a sudden it just bursts. And what my dad is saying is if you don't get to the hospital within 20 minutes on the surgery table, which like there's such a low chance of that happening, like you are literally dead in an instant. And it can be coming from like somebody just joking around and doing like a chest bump with you, like him and his group of guy friends. Like it's so scary to think about what could have possibly happened if his primary doctor did not catch this during just a general checkup. So the reason why this is significant, and I want to pause and talk about it, is because I'm fortunate enough. I have not had any close people other than my dad's dad, my pop-up, a couple of years ago, pass away. And when this whole aneurysm thing happened with my dad, which was about, what you're saying, 10 years ago? Was it really that long?
Close to
maybe
it.
Like 8-10 years ago. I just automatically, and I don't know if anybody else can relate to this, but I just saw like a different perspective of life where it's like you think that the people closest to you are just going to be around forever and that we're all just going to like live till like 100, and you're not really thinking about dying or like death on a daily basis, and you think the people that are healthiest in your life, that they're just going to be the ones that are, like they're okay, like nothing's going to happen to them. And so when I found out about this aneurysm, I was like rocked. Like I was having panic attacks at random points. I remember being on a plane once. I had a panic attack that came out of nowhere, and just thinking about you. And it was the scariest thing because you're just like by yourself and you can't calm yourself down. And I remember having like my hooded sweatshirt on. I was like on the window seat, just being like, just breathe, just breathe, just breathe. But all to say, I ended up going to therapy years later for that because I was noticing that was kind of impacting our relationship a little bit, because I almost like didn't want to talk to you about like health, or I didn't really want, which was such a big passion of ours. Like you and I love working out together and like making new recipes and things like that. And I found myself kind of like pulling back, which like my therapist had said at the time, she was like, it's almost kind of like you're trying to like put a divide in between you two because of this like subconscious thought that if you get any closer, like the pain would hurt more if you know that he's ever not going to be okay or something like that. So all to say that, then on top of it, compounded with the fact that my relationship to food, because of diabetes, went through, and for those of you guys who know my story, like I went through a very rocky period in my like late teens, early 20s, basically like all of college, where I tried to be perfect with my A1C. And the only way I knew how to do that at the time was through nutrition. And this might be something you're hearing actually for the first time, Dad. I don't know if I've ever told you this.
Well, I don't know about your emotional impact and response to me sharing with you that I had the aneurysm. I tried really not to even tell anyone until today, until the last 5 minutes. Probably about 20 people on the whole planet know about it. I didn't even tell my dad before he passed. I didn't even tell him I had it. So no, I didn't know about your response to this and what you were going through, and which emphasized the reason why I shouldn't share stuff with you or others, because I don't want people to be upset.
Okay, so sorry. No, that's a key piece right there. So That, though, compounded with the fact that during my rocky relationship with food, period, where I was just trying to get my A1C down and be perfect with my numbers, and therefore how I did that was through restriction and doing all of these crazy diets. I think the aneurysm compounded with watching you then. I didn't really know what your A1Cs were in that like quote unquote pre-diabetic time because you weren't really sharing it with me, but I just saw you kind of being like, oh yeah, my blood sugar is rising a little bit, like I'm gonna cut out oil, I'm going to like go to this absolute extreme. And that triggered me, I think, because it brought me back to the time where I did that. And it was almost like I know that it works for blood sugars in a way, but it's not sustainable. And I didn't know how to like communicate that with you. So once again, I just kind of like kept my distance and was like, this is his journey. Like he has to figure it out. But once again, it comes back to because you didn't want people to worry about you, especially I think me, I didn't really know in the years leading up until kind of like about a year ago that your A1C was like continually rising.
It was continually, yes, it was definitely, it was definitely continuing to rise. And no matter what I was doing, increasing cardio, trying all of the low carb, high complex carbs, low fat, higher fat, low complex carbs, increasing, counting carbs, doing it all from all of it, including balance, which is hard for me. It didn't really have an effect. There was at one time a couple of years ago where my A1C was 6.1. I decided to kick it up a notch and went total vegan with only 9 to 11 grams of fat a day, and I did knock it down to 5.9. But after that, I let go a little bit, and it just shot up until last year when I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes.
Okay, so let's go like directly so everybody understands the timeline. So August 2019, he hits that 6.0 A1C and is like closer than ever to that pre-diabetic range.
Well, to the diabetic range, 6.4.
Sorry, yeah, you're right, type 2 diabetes range. Then September 2020, so a year later, he gets a 6.3 A1C. And that's when he's like really frustrated. And he's somebody who's like, if I put my mind to something, I'm going to do it. And that's when he went on like the low oil Esseltyn diet. Then April 2021 and vegan. Yeah. That was like the period where my mom was going to kill him because she's trying to make like Sunday night pasta and like he's like putting orange juice concoctions in it because he's like, it can substitute for oil. And my mom's just like, I'm literally going to kill you.
I was sauteing a little bit in the spot of orange juice. I wasn't substituting orange juice for olive oil, particularly extra virgin, but go ahead.
Okay, whatever it was, we were all a little bit like, okay, what's going on here? So then in April of 2021, so about September 2020 through April 2021, after doing that diet and being absolutely extreme, like there was nothing more that this man could have been doing, he now lowers his A1C back down for the first time to a 5.9. So he lowers it 0.4. But I remember that's when I kind of started to hear like that, wait a second, like you're doing all of this and that is not bumping you down back into the 4 healthy rate, like in range, no diabetes range. Like that is literally only just like moving it marginally. And I think you realized I'm not going to trade off so much of like this stress for only like lowering my A1C 0.4. Like that's not what you expected.
In part of it was mommy going, there's no way that we're going to do this for another year, this vegan thing and all of that. We're going to take a look at the Metformin. Lauren's talking about Metformin. Get involved in Metformin, look into it. So I did a ton of research on Metformin. It did not appear to have negative consequences. It did not appear to have side effects other than minor side effects. And so...
but you just, you didn't go on it at that point because your A1C was a 5.9. I'm staying with the timeline here. Because then... that's April of 2021. So then you loosen up things a little bit. Like you add some more oil in. You're still working out like crazy, eating healthy. But October of 2021, now it shoots back up to a 6.4. So now it's the highest number it's ever been. Right. And at that point, you're still not even convinced with Metformin from the timeline. You're like, I'm still going to continue to try to like keep Metformin in the back of my mind, but like just watch where things are going.
Correct. I wasn't ready to take any medication regarding this. I thought I still had some control.
Right. So now here's where things take a turn. December of 2022, your A1C comes back at 7.1. What is happening when you get that 7.1 A1C?
I had just read some articles and did some research on the correlation between high sugars, high A1Cs, high fasting glucose numbers in the morning, and connection with degeneration of brain and Alzheimer's, and how they're drawing this connection to those types of problems, mental cognitive degeneration. And so between that and now officially in the range for diagnosis of diabetes,
Type 2.
Type 2, having tried everything I could try, it's been a good effort. And having done the research that metformin had little side effects and actually some indications of some benefits, I decided to, with my doctor, to get on metformin. So started taking metformin around last December, January.
Yep.
January of this year. And
yeah,
that's where we are.
And that's where we are. Okay. So now, here's where I decide to wake up.
Here comes Lauren going, type 2? I don't know. Did you take this test? No. Did you take that test? No. Take this test? Okay. I'm going to get right back to you. Speaks to her endocrinologist. They have a discussion. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I'm taking tests to see if I have type 1.
Okay. But this is how it happened, because the way that it happened was so insane. So my parents are snowbirds from New York in the past couple of years. And so they spend some of the winters in Florida. So I go down to visit my parents for a couple days in the last week of January of this year. And while I'm there, I'm hearing murmurings. I'm hearing murmurings of, did you take your from my mom? Did you take your metformin? Then all of a sudden my dad's blood pressure is really low. My mom's going, maybe it was a metformin. I'm going metformin. Like, I'm so confused. Like, bring me up to speed. So now he's bringing me up to speed, or my mom is. I hear the 7.1 A1C and I'm kind of just like, okay, that's like really pre-diabetic, but like still I'm in the middle of my day. I'm like working while I'm down there. I'm not really like, it was almost like it was a passing statement, but it was enough.
6.1.
No, this was a 7.1 A1C.
Which is clear diabetes at that point.
Right, clear type 2 diabetes.
Right.
It was being treated as type 2. So I hear that 7.1 and I'm just kind of like, almost like there's some red flags raised, but they're like very much in the back of my head, because there's no way that there can be another type 1 in my family, right? Like, no, like I'm the type 1 of the family. Like, that wouldn't make sense. Like, of course the doctors run all the tests. Like, it's type 2. So now I am on an enrollment call, which our coaching specialists on our team take enrollment calls after people apply, like to really understand if we can help them through coaching and if they're a good fit, and go through all the details of whether it's group coaching or one-on-one that is best fit, and all of that, answering people's questions. And there was a scheduling conflict, and like I had to jump in and take one of the calls, which like I always love doing, because that's where my heart is just like meeting people where they're at their lowest with their diabetes. So I get on this call with this woman, and she's literally telling me that she's like, I want to enroll in coaching with your team because after years of being misdiagnosed as type 2, I finally got the correct type 1 diagnosis, and now I know what I'm dealing with, and now I'm like, ready for the right support with my, to improve relationship to food and A1C and all of these things. And I'm like, so interesting. Like, tell me about like the pre-diabetic and type 2 like diagnosis. She's like, well, for several years I was, trying to lower my blood sugar through extreme exercise, and I was doing this diet and I was doing this diet and it wasn't budging. And then finally I switched endocrinologists, and the endocrinologist told me that, I really just want to check you out for type 1. And I'm sitting there and I'm still not even thinking about you, but I'm getting so enraged, because how frustrating is it that there can be so many years of somebody's life struggling doing that, thinking it's type 2, only to find out that it's type 1. So that is the thing that like really gets me, right? Like this kind of like, injustice in the healthcare system, and like how can we be getting it wrong so many times? I recently learned that there's a stat that says that there are more currently adult diagnoses of type 1 diabetes than there are in children, and yet 40% of adults who have type 1 diabetes are misdiagnosed as type 2 or pre-diabetic. And so that was the last call I had of the day. We had enrolled her in coaching. You know, she was doing one-on-one with one of the coaches on our team. Like, great, let's pass the baton over. I come out of that. Mom is making dinner, and us three are sitting around the table. And you naturally ask me, oh, like, what kind of calls did you have today? How was your day? And I go to talk about, you won't believe it. There's this woman who we just enrolled in coaching, and she, you know, and I go through the whole story. And literally, as the words are coming out through my mouth, I remember you were sitting at the head of the table to the right. I was sitting to your left, and Mom was sitting right across to me, like to your right. And I remember literally like looking up at her, and I swear to God, she looked up at almost the exact same time, and kind of we made those like eyes with each other where it was like, you don't say anything, but you're just like, oh my God. And it was like both this knowing at the same time with you're still eating it. I think we looked
I'm looking at past the crushed pepper and the crushed red pepper. I didn't know you guys were involved in all that.
Right. So I look at you and I'm like, oh my God, we need to get you a C-peptide test. We need to get you, you know, all these biomarker checks for your type 1 diabetes, because this actually would make a lot of sense. So how were you feeling in that moment when I realized that? Because I was feeling a mixed bag of emotions. One being, how did I not see this, was like the biggest feeling I was feeling.
Well, it was actually a few weeks after when you had suggested to me that I take these marker tests. And so obviously this is your lane, this is your life, and I have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for you, and I listen to you. So when Lauren tells me take these marker tests, I call the doctor and I say I need to take another blood test, and these marker tests have to be included. And the tests are taken, and the first one comes back. Was it the GAD test?
So can I just give a shout out here to Dr. Sobel? So she is an angel. One of my, I would say, colleagues, she is an endocrinologist. You can look her up on Instagram. Her name is Sandra Sobel, and we actually bonded because she's Peruvian, and me being that grandpa being from Peru, like we automatically like hit it off the first time that we had met. But she's somebody who I respect. She has her own endocrinology practice called Summon Health, and she is someone who I was like, you know what, we can't get in touch with an endocrinologist. My dad you were only like talking with your primary doctor, and endocrinology was booked out for like 5 months. So I was like, let me just ask her like what her thoughts were. So she was like, have him get a C-peptide test, and a GAD-65 test. And so those were the tests that you got. You took the test, you got the blood work back. Your doctor didn't interpret it or anything. I think you just got the results back and you had sent it to me. So now I remember it was like the middle of the day. It was January 31st so maybe I was in Florida a couple weeks earlier, because when I got this test, when I got your lab works back, it was January 31st. And I remember I opened it up and I saw that the C-peptide range is 1.1 to 4.4, and your C-peptide was a 2.2. So I look at that and I say, all right, that looks pretty promising. But then you look at the GAD-65, which is another main marker for type 1 diabetes, and that one was like, I don't know, I have the exact number it was here, but that one was like super clear, like way off the charts.
A few thousand over. It was like an extreme.
It was like, I think the range was like 0. Don't quote me on this, but it was like the equivalent of like 0 through 100 was the range. And he was like 3,565 or something like that. And yeah. So I then get that and my heart drops, because I just like have this knowing something's not right here. I send it to Dr. Sobel. She, within minutes, was like, can I call you? And I'm like, ugh, you never want to hear that. And so we chatted, and she was like, this looks like type 1. I can't say for certain, but like, just have him get into an endocrinologist. So that's pretty much kind of what happened there. I would say that when your A1C was a 7.1 in December, and then he went on the metformin, when you got all those blood works back in end of January, your A1C was a 6.3 with 138 fasting glucose. So the fasting glucose was still really high, comparatively to like where it should be, but your A1C had dropped, thankfully, to A, the metformin, but also B, because he's in this very long extended honeymoon phase right now where his beta cells are still working and he still has insulin production.
I have insulin production. I've now been diagnosed because recently I went for the second test, another test recently, and that confirmed also the second
yes
test that you take to determine whether or not you have a predisposition or you have type 1, and that confirmed that I have type 1. I confirmed that I have type 1, not type 2.
Right. And so I think that piece of it is important to explain too, because I think it really has changed the way that I think about people who are misdiagnosed as type 2 or pre-diabetic, but they're really type 1. Because the reason why I really didn't talk about this, other than just like emotionally processing this all myself and just, like keeping it in our family first for a little while, we weren't certain that you had type 1. I think there were still elements, because your body was still having this beta cell production, that I was like looking for other reasons of like why your antibodies could be that high, like why your GAD65 was showing back so high. And one of the things that came back was like, hey, if you're, I think like anemic or low iron levels, I think that's what it was. Like that could potentially impact things. So then the doctor wanted to like run all these other tests that took a few months to get back. Plus, then you didn't get into an endocrinologist until when? September?
Correct.
Big problem. Big problem that somebody who thinks that they have type 1 diabetes cannot get into an endocrinologist for 5 months. That is something we hear all of the time. It's because endocrinology is one of the lowest paid specialties. There are not enough of endocrinologists in terms of like the ratio of people that live with type 1 diabetes. And that is like, that's a root problem. That's a systemic issue that needs to be fixed, because you had so many people in your support system, but like what if somebody like just thought, oh, okay, like I can't get into the endo for 5 months, that's okay, and then is like such a liability for, let's say, their A1C to continue to climb, yep. And then they go into DKA. Like that's so frustrating. Mm-hmm. So for you, I think there was a little bit of back and forth and us trying to really solidify things. But then your endocrinologist, who is so lovely and so wonderful, and I want you to talk about that first interaction in a second, but she had ran the ZNT8 antibody test, and that was like this third test that she wanted to get to double confirm, and the range was like, if it came back negative, it was, or like an in range was lower than 15, and you were at 446. And then that was when she called you, and like 2 weeks ago, literally. Like we didn't really get confirmation on this like until 2 weeks ago, left a voicemail and was like, you have type 1 LADA.
I have type 1 LADA.
Is that weird
so
to
you and
say?
you and I have something in common other than green eyes.
We do.
Yeah.
So tell us about that first interaction with the endocrinologist and how she told you that you had type 1 diabetes.
Dr. Eschler. She's actually in the same group as your endocrinologist. She was wonderful. Spent, I don't know, almost an hour and a half with me. Wonderful, wonderful doctor. And after looking at the numbers, after looking at the history, I went in with my A1Cs, tracked for the last 8 years. I went in for with my glucose fasting numbers in the morning, explained to her my workouts, explained to her everything, and she basically said, I'm sorry to report, and I feel bad, but you have type 1. And I was like, Lauren already told me that. But that's when I really heard it for the first time from a doctor. And that was it.
So I was more emotionally distraught. Not anymore. I'm okay with it now. But back in January and like February, when like we really initially found out that lab work, I was crying. I was emotionally distraught over it. You have, I don't want to say you've been unfazed, but you have been just like, it's okay, I got this. Like whenever I need to start taking insulin, because right now you're still on Metformin and just like have used a CGM to like manage and just keep track of your blood sugars. But that honeymoon phase, like right now, your diet and your exercise is prolonging the need for, insulin. But why do you think that you haven't been emotionally impacted by the diagnosis in the way that like other people may be, or even like I was hearing that you had type 1?
Well, first, I didn't know, again, until now, that you were so emotionally impacted by learning that I was diagnosed with type 1, and at some point in time I'd like to set aside some time for you and I to sit and talk, and for us to hug, and for me to know more about why that was so, and hopefully you're rebounding from that and dealing with it. And if there's anything I could do to help, including to let you know that I feel fine, let me know. So when I found out about it, that I was type 1, to be honest with you, totally cognizant of the fact that type 1 is extremely difficult and challenging, and it's that way every minute of every day for someone who has type 1 diabetes. I know that from watching you firsthand since you're 7 years old. It was a little bit of a refreshing news to some extent, because I was very frustrated, right? For 10 years, I'm watching my A1C rise. For 10 years, I'm watching my morning fasting glucose rise when you go for the blood test and you don't eat from the night before. And it's supposed to be 70, 70, 68. And mine is 106, 108, 110, 120, 128. And I don't know why. I haven't eaten for 15 hours. My insulin should have brought down my glucose level, and I'm getting confused, and I'm increasing working out. I'm trying all these diets, and my A1C is going up and up and up. It was very frustrating. So when I learned that, you know what, certain things are out of your control, and one of the things, at least at this point, other than maybe a few exceptions of some new medications, the reality is you don't have type 2, you have type 1, which means that this is not a situation where you're eating really lousy and you've overtaxed your liver and your insulin production isn't working because you're insulin resistant, or it's not a situation where you've just abused your body for the last 20 years, so now you're not producing enough insulin because you're aging and your B cells aren't producing enough insulin. It's not that. It's that I have an autoimmune deficiency, an autoimmune disease, where my body is attacking my own cells and causing the cells to be destroyed, and thereby resulting in less insulin production. And eventually, once you get out of this phase where you're sort of still producing cells, eventually I'm not going to produce any insulin, and I'm going to feel the full wrath of having type 1 diabetes, which means doing what you've been doing since you're 7 years old, worrying about your sugars going low, worry about going to bed at night and not waking up ever because your sugars are low, worried about having enough energy to get through the next hour, taking enough orange juice so you can get through a soccer game as you play Division I soccer, and watching you on a soccer field, watching your legs weaken from underneath you after not sleeping at all and playing in soccer games at 95-degree weather the next day, and watching you almost faint, and watching you have to worry about everything you eat. And it's a 24/7 concern. So I'm aware of it, and I know that's the full wrath and more, not to mention the potential problems and eye problems and damage to your body and death that can come as a result of having type 1 diabetes. I'm fully aware of it. But to some extent, it was refreshing to know what it was, what my problem is, and what I have. The second thing, to more directly answer your question as to why I didn't seem to be so upset. Number one, you have this since you're 7. I'm much older, and I've had many years of not having had it. And I've watched you endure the obstacles, the challenges, and to have the courage that you've had in dealing with this. I've watched you not only confront type 1 diabetes, but flourish in amazing ways, not to mention what you do to help the community and to change lives and do what you do as being in the world of type 1 diabetes as a coach. It just would not feel right for me to complain, be honest with you. And it doesn't mean I'm not aware of what it is, but I would not feel I would not feel comfortable doing that. Second, it's not really my nature to complain about things that are out of my control. And now that I know that type 1 diabetes to some extent is out of my control, I'll continue what I'm doing with nutrition and fitness and all of those things, and take metformin and other things that are not experimental, but are coming onto the scene. But what I'm not going to do is whine about it, and I'm not going to worry about something that to some extent is out of my control. I think it was Viktor Frankl who said, great psychiatrist, back in the 50s, I think, who said there is one freedom that can't be taken away from a person, and that is the freedom to choose your attitude when faced with a set of circumstances. And I've watched you face your set of circumstances, your obstacle, your challenge, and I hope I can, at the very least, having been at the front row of watching you, the front seat of watching you endure and flourish with your obstacle and challenge of type 1 diabetes, I hope I've learned a little bit about having a courageous attitude. And I guess the final thing is, as we get older, me specifically, not you, we learn that we have to accept the human condition. The human condition is life. And what life brings is often different than what we hope it to bring, or what we desire, what we want, what we wish for, what we'd like to happen. It's life. And life brings good things and bad things and horrible things and tragic things and happy things and sadness and suffering and disease and a whole bunch of things that are out of our control. And so we have to accept this is life. And so I accept, there are a lot worse things that one can get, and some things not as bad, but it is what it is. As Plato said, be kind to everyone. Everyone has a hard life. Everyone has something, and I am definitely not going to complain. I am probably the main reason why I would never complain is probably the most important thing that any human being can have in life is love, to be loved, to have the capacity to love, to have people to love, to have the ability to love the people in your life, and great relationships, deep, real relationships. And I have all of that, and I've always had all of that, from my parents to my children and my dear friends and relatives. So with all that blessing, I would never complain about type 1 diabetes. I just wouldn't. It just doesn't feel right. So I'm blessed across the board, and to have you alongside of me while I'm blessed.
Oh, well, I think that, all that is so you. And I saw a comment that somebody had posted on the Instagram post that I did today about your diagnosis, and I read it very quickly, and I want to go back and read it and read all the other ones, but it was essentially saying, how beautiful is it that what your dad and mom gave to you, you now are giving back to him. And initially when I was reading it, I thought I first thought about it as, the tool sets that you are I have gotten over the years, I can help support you with, just with the education and the CGMs and all those insulin, all those things. But then I read it again and I was like, oh, I think what she means, and what's even more powerful, is kind of like the person that I am today that has allowed you to feel confident in this ability to navigate this diagnosis is because of you and because of Mom. So much of my journey with diabetes and my attitude towards it and my ability to be grateful in ways for it comes from you helping frame that outlook for me when I was first diagnosed at 7.
I learned more from you than you learned from me, I'll be honest with you. I've watched you with lows of 50 and 60, and in all of the years that you've had this, and I know you, I'm sure, felt differently, but I have never heard you complain about it. It's the most amazing thing. I've never heard you complain. So for me, a complaint about it would be a whining, to be honest with you. So.
Well, and what I talk about and what I think is healthy is that if you are having the feelings, feel the feelings, and they're not bad because you don't want to suppress them. But I think, to your point, because your blood sugar, yes, you're having a 250 blood sugar after you're eating oatmeal, and if you're not exercising and things like that, but you're not having these classic type 1 no insulin production ups and downs and crazy lows. You're not there yet, and we don't know when you're going to be there. So basically, you may be coming back on the podcast next year being whoa, I am emotionally distraught.
No, that's entirely
okay.
That's entirely possible, because I don't know what that feels like, really. And there is in my mind, or at least maybe at the back of my mind or the forefront of my mind, the intention and the hope that I'm going to keep these beta cells, these babies, kicking out insulin for quite some time. So I know when you're younger, from what I understand from doctors and research, that sometimes that honeymoon period from when your beta cells start to decrease to the point when you're not producing any insulin at all, called that honeymoon phase. I know sometimes when you're younger, that takes a little, that happens a little quicker sometimes, or in most instances, what I understand. When you, those of us who get diagnosed with type 1 later on, that honeymoon phase can last longer. And my endocrinologist actually said it could be 6 weeks, it could be 6 months, it could be 6 years before you stop producing insulin. And when that happens, to some extent, it's refreshing to know that you're there with everything that you have to teach and show me, and what you've taught me already, and just being with you on this journey. It's a little bit more comforting to know. And also, I don't know what that feels like to be low. I'm not there yet, or to be high, or to go through all of that you have to go through every second of every day. But hopefully, when it happens, if it happens, I'll be ready to embrace it.
Yes. And that's the thing that I wanted to add to and tell you is that because we've coached so many hundreds of people at Risley, and with more numbers becomes, patterns that you're able to recognize in certain cases. And what we have found is that a lot of the people who are diagnosed with type 1.5, which is LADA, there is definitely a little bit less of a volatility with their numbers in comparison to somebody who gets like a straight up type 1 diagnosis. And that could be because they still have a little bit of like beta cell production, but it's just kind of like has been decreasing over the years. And so it really is a lot slower of a progression. So what your doctor is saying is completely correct, where like you might actually not need to, be on insulin for another year. Like we don't know how this is going to play out. And thanks to shout out Ginger Vieira at T1D Exchange, she talked to you, and you're going to look into taking a GLP-1, which is proven to help preserve your beta cell production before you get on insulin.
I did some research on a GLP-1, and I do appreciate her speaking to me today and filling me in on some of the benefits of it. And in the research that I did, it does seem to indicate that it reduces the amount of insulin, the amount of glucose that's produced by the liver. Also seems to indicate that it helps with reduce insulin resistance, and also maybe even increase the production of insulin that the body's naturally producing, and many other benefits. So I'm going to verify the research that I did. I'm going to learn more. I'm going to speak to the doctor. I'm going to certainly follow your direction and her direction, because she was so well informed. And I'm going to consider that, and the metformin, and from what I understand, continue with the exercise and nutrition, because there does seem to be an indication that some of that, or all of it combined, could help in delaying the total destruction of beta cells, and perhaps delay this honeymoon period for many, many years. Maybe I'll have my own podcast someday talking about how this is possible.
No, absolutely. And I think your diet and exercise has helped you along the way. Like it's been, several years of this like slow climb, and there's no doubt like you are, like you are contributing to that. At least that's what I think. Lastly, I would love to share with you two things. One, the reason why that I was so emotionally impacted by it was because I think just in that initial hearing, like seeing the antibodies being off the chart and like this is definitely type 1, I automatically for the first time felt like I could really feel how a caregiver of a child with type 1 diabetes feels, where they know logically this happens to people all around the world every day. People, are red carpet actors with it, professional athletes, scientists, doctors, lawyers. Like it's not going to stop them. However, you just don't want someone you love ever have to struggle. And it's that like pain that you feel knowing that, like, I love you so much and I never would ever want you or anybody else who I'm close with to have to feel the feeling of waking up in the middle of the night with drenched in sweat with a blood sugar that's low and being disoriented, being like, I need juice, or the feeling of, going out with your friends to dinner and then having your CGM's alarm and it's like, triple arrow, double arrow up, and you're like, wait, now I can't have the bread and the pasta that I ordered, right? It's just like those things that like were like flooding through my mind, and that's why I was really emotional, because I think it was almost kind of like, I just feel like I really truly now can relate to the first time in like what you probably felt when I was diagnosed.
When I felt every day of your life as a parent, when I used to say to you, Lauren, safety, health, and reputation.
Before I left the house.
Before you left the house, every time, 10 times. So that's what being a parent is about, worrying about you and worrying about every moment and your safety and your health, and being sick to think that things aren't good for you, and that even worse, there's nothing I could do to help you with that problem. And so I appreciate the empathy, and I'm sad that you went through that, and you're so compassionate, empathetic to start with, and I'm sure that the impact to you as my daughter must have been heavy, and I'm sorry you went through that. I love you.
That's okay. I moved through it. I moved through it because once I understood more, it was LADA. It's a lot slower of a progression. Like you don't have to be on insulin right this second. Like I just was able to be like, okay, we can take this at like a slower pace, which I also think is the benefit of having a type 1 LADA diagnosis versus a type 1, where there are so many people who just get a type 1 diagnosis and like within 2 weeks, right? Like everything in their life, or within days, everything in their life, not even 2 weeks. Where did I get that from? Days. Now you're taking insulin shots, you're on a CGM, you are having lows, you're having highs, and it's such a drastic difference from what your reality to be, where you almost have this runway, which we can kind of prepare you for, and you have the relief of knowing now what you're dealing with, and that it's not type 2, and you don't have to go run or just do cardio every single day, and it's not your fault.
It's not my fault, but I definitely need to do cardio every day. In fact, I'm ready for the gym soon. So.
Amazing. Okay. Well, are there any last words that you want to share with people specifically? Let's say with people specifically who are misdiagnosed as type 2 or pre-diabetic and are going through this like limbo period of not knowing that if they're type 1 or what the deal is.
Number one, I think first and foremost, you should get your blood checked twice a year. And when you get the blood tests, you should specifically request an A1C reading, because that's not a part of a normal blood panel that they take. Number two, you should take a close look at your fasting glucose. That means when the doctor tells you don't eat the night before, so when you go and take your blood test the next day, they're expecting your blood glucose level, your fasting blood glucose level, to be a certain level, and it will indicate whether or not your body is, functioning properly, producing insulin, dealing with the glycemic index the right way. You have to pay attention to the fasting blood glucose level in your blood test. So you should request that. You should request the A1C, and you should pay attention to all of these things and be responsible for your own health. So when the doctor is telling you you're type 2, and you have someone that you could talk to, like Lauren, who said, or your endocrinologist or any medical provider, you should really look into all of this, because you want to be responsible for your own health for sure.
I love that. Let's end on that message. Dad, thank you so much for coming on almost a year to the date exactly of when you were on last time, and maybe you'll come on for a third time next year and we can kind of check in and see where your blood sugars are at.
One final thing, you have to be careful what you wish for, because this is one thing I'd like to say is I remember when you were diagnosed with type 1, you were 7 years old, and I remember saying, I wish it were me and not her. So now I didn't wish it was both of us. I wish it were me and not you, and I still wish that, but it is what it is. We have what we have, and we'll certainly deal with it the way you've taught me to deal with it. So.
Now our bond is even stronger. Thank you so much for being here with me today and listening to this episode of Reclaim Your Rise. To let us know that the episodes we're putting out are impactful and to help us get our street cred up and let everyone else know that this is something worthy of their time to listen to, please leave a rating and review on our Apple Podcasts, send the show to other people impacted by T1D or maybe even your doctor, and share it on social media tagging @Risley Health and @Lauren_Bongiorno. New episodes of Reclaim Your Rise come out every single Tuesday, so make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so that you never miss a beat. Thanks again for listening, and as always, remember, diabetes is a challenge that we did not choose, but one that we can rise above.